Well, thank you very much. I'm extremely glad to be here. As you'll see, I'm a conscious capitalism person. This is the first time I've been here. I'd like to know why not. Look, Bernie Sanders and I are the same age. Don't do the mathematics, please. Thank you. And in 1960, when he and I were 18, he was a freshman at the University of Chicago. I was a freshman at Harvard, and we were both socialists. Now, I didn't know Bernie at the time, but I know exactly what he was thinking. Because all we people on the left, especially on the Marxist socialist left, felt that for one thing, capitalism was easy. The job that you do can be done by a Harvard graduate in English, right? If she's working in Washington. And we thought that capitalism was exploitative. There's a famous story about the other Marx, Groucho. In the 30s, a friend of his who was a Marxist, a communist, came to him and said, "Groucho, I'm starving. My children are starving. I've got to have a job in the movie industry, in which you're so successful." And Groucho's sense of humor was cruel, and he said, "George, I can't help you. Because you're a communist, I don't want to exploit you." That's how we felt. Now, since 1960, Bernie, a socialist and an atheist, hasn't changed his mind. In fact, I'm not sure what's quite going on in his mind, because there's been a lot of experience since 1960. The most recent is Venezuela, that shows that socialism doesn't work and capitalism does. So I started on this path away from that. I started to study economics. I was a Keynesian because that's what was on offer at Harvard. Then became a kind of social engineer, but my first job was at the famous University of Chicago. Milton Friedman was a colleague of mine down the hall, which is scary, I can tell you. So I became gradually to see, as an economic historian, which is what I became, I love dead people. The more dead, the better. The idea that in Mesopotamia, 2,000 years before Christ, you can find business letters that sound like they were written today. It thrills me. So I realized in economic history, through economic history, that capitalism has been amazingly productive for the people I mainly care about, which is poor people. That's why I got into economics in the first place. That's why Bernie Sanders was a socialist and I was too, to help the poor. But what I came to understand is the magnitude of the enrichment from capitalism. I call it the great enrichment. And boy, is it great. I take it there are no descendants of the crowned heads of Europe, Asia, or Africa here. I look around, I don't see any Habsburg chins. Everyone in this room, I take it certainly applies to me, you don't have to go very far back to find incredibly impoverished peasants. In my case, Irish and Norwegian. Yet here we are of a Wednesday morning talking about the history and philosophy and theology of capitalism. What's going on here? How did this happen? What was its magnitude? Here it is. If you don't learn anything except this, you've gotten a very important fact about us, about our history. Not just the United States, but the whole world. Since 1800, real income per head, the ability to buy stuff, services, goods and services, has increased not by 100%, a doubling, and we're talking about the poorest people here, not by a factor of 200%, but by 3,000%. Finns, they're in Finland, as you may know, they were among the poorest people in Europe in 1800. Now, Finland is among the richest country in the world. Same thing is true of Japan, but the same thing is true to only a slightly smaller degree for England and France and the United States and so forth. So we've been immensely enriched by this. Now, by the way, as a former Marxist, I know very well that Marx and Engels knew this in 1848. The whole theory of classical Marxism is that you allow entrepreneurs, the word was not in as such common use in those days, but you allow entrepreneurs in capitalism to immensely innovate, and then as socialists, we pluck the ripe fruit for the benefit of the working class that in the meantime, alas, under capitalism, has been immiserized. Well, I soon learned that the working class was not immiserized. It was made immensely better off by what I call the bourgeois deal, the middle class entrepreneurial deal. You let me, bourgeois, make profit and innovate, now here it is, and I'll make you rich. And that's what happened by a factor of 33,000%. Actually, I gave a talk somewhat similar to this at the great Department of Cultural Anthropology at Cambridge University in England this fall. And a very distinguished cultural anthropologist got up afterwards and said, well, I can believe your figure of 30 times for the increase since 1800. But 3,000 is too big. Think about it. Go back to the 4th grade. That's not what I said to him. He's a nice man. So we're immensely enriched. But wait a second. After my gender change in 1995, I came to Christianity. I became an Anglican. We call them Episcopalian because we couldn't go on calling ourselves Anglican after the American Revolution. And I asked myself, well, how about the other charge in socialism? That if the working class maybe are enriched, contrary to what Marx and Engels said, well, maybe they're corrupted. Maybe they're alienated. Maybe they lose, as it says in the Bible, they gain the world, but they lose their immortal soul. And I'm not in favor of that. If all of you all were corrupted, your souls were corrupted by being in business, I would be a socialist still. But I don't think that's true. I don't think it's true, and so I looked into it. And I have here a wonderful book you can get on Amazon cheap, which I published in 2006, called The Bourgeois Virtues, Ethics for an Age of Commerce, in which, in 500 pages, I discovered what conscious capitalism says in one paragraph. and to summarize what I've asked and answered is, does engagement in capitalism as a consumer, as a producer, as an employee, as an entrepreneur, as a banker, does it corrupt the soul? And the executive summary is no. So that's book number one. Then I thought, I'm an academic. I write long books. I thought, well, now wait a second. We still need to explain this factor of 30. And so I did a second book as a historian and economist, which was published in 2010, called Bourgeois Dignity. Now hear this, hear the subtitle, because it's always in the subtitle that you get what the actual subject is. Why economics can't explain the modern world. Now wait a second, that's odd for an economist, a Chicago school economist, though alas trained at Harvard. Why economics can't explain the world? Well, what I argue in the book and show, again in 500 pages, well, it's word processing that has done this to me. I once wrote short books, now I can't stop. But the argument is that neither my old Marxism, the exploitation argument, nor my new Chicago school capital accumulation argument explain the modern world. And I go into detail. It's not coal, it's not slavery, it's not those things. It's what? Well, wait for it. Volume 3, published in 2016. Those are each 500 pages. This is 700 pages. I was going to do a I was going to do 4 volumes, but I said to myself, look, a trilogy might be considered somewhat self-indulgent, but a tetralogy is an abomination. You should be stoned to death if you do 4 volumes. So I made it very thick, holds open most doors, and it's called Bourgeois Equality. How ideas, now hear this, this is the central point. How ideas, not capital or institutions, enriched the world. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's an economic, historical, theological, philosophical, I stutter, as you may have noticed, literary assembling of the evidence to show that ideas made the modern world in the sense of the innovations all around us. Then you invested. But you had to have the idea first. I mean, is there anyone in this room who doesn't think that's true? That if you're going to make an investment in Whole Foods or something, you have to have the idea for Whole Foods in Austin, Texas, before you go to the banker or your uncle or something to get the money to do it. So ideas, organizational ideas like Whole Foods, or technological ideas like the steam engine or the railway, institutional ideas like the modern research university invented in 1810 in the University of Berlin. Those are the source of our enrichment. Think of it this way. Think of an old mechanical watch. It's got gears. Those are the institutions and the capital accumulation mechanisms and the labor force and, well, all the necessary components of an economy. Things like oxygen in the air or the existence of a labor force or the arrow of time. Those are all necessary. But what was sufficient in the 18th and 19th century to get it going, start going towards the great enrichment factor of 30? The spring imparts the energy to all the gears. It was ideas. Now, where did these ideas come from? Well, you have to buy and read volume 3, which, by the way, all 3 volumes are available as spoken books. When you do your commute, you can read them. The answer is, now this idea will shock you, I think, is liberalism. That's what made the modern world. Now, it's not what we in the United States called liberalism, which, to go back to Bernie Sanders, is socialism. It's the idea that a society of free people is the best. No slaves, no subordination of women to men, no subordination of slaves to masters, no subordination of citizens to the government. That idea inspirited people, as the people in this room have been inspirited, to have a go, as the English say, to try out new ideas on a massive scale, because everyone eventually was almost completely freed. And that's my argument. We're rich, we're reasonably ethical, because we're free. Thank you very much.